Are you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome to the Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose podcast. I have on my show today, Brittney Phillips. Brittney is a mom of four in a yours, mine, and ours family dynamic and a certified coach and teacher. She has personal experience in blending her own family and spent many years learning strategies in the School of Hard Knocks. Her approach is centered around empowering women to strengthen themselves, which ultimately influences and benefits the whole family. Welcome to the podcast, Brittney. I'm so glad that you have taken your time out to be with me today. And I'd really love for you just to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on the show, Brenda. It's good to be here. A little about me is you kind of said a little in my bio here, but my family is a blended family. My husband and I were both divorced when we met, and we're single parenting when we got together, which we thought was going to be a pretty good, easy transition going in. And much to our surprise, it ended up being extremely difficult. And I would even say possibly more difficult than even going through a divorce. And so that's, one thing led to another. Like we've worked through things. We actually at one point talked about getting divorced because it was so hard.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, which was like not even anywhere. I don't think anyone really ever gets married to and thinks about getting divorced, but there were just so many challenges that were unexpected, and that was the reality of the situation. Like, what have we done? What did we get ourselves into? And so anyway, with lots of work, lots of relearning how to do things, thinking outside the box as far as how we have a family, raise our kids. And like it said in my bio, the School of Hard Knocks, we did it the hard way. And so that's kind of why I do what I do now. I coach women in blended families because I think there's not enough resources. In the United States alone, 40% of families are step families. And
that's a high number. Wow.
That's really high.
Yeah.
And I'm like, people aren't talking about this enough. Like if 40% of the people, that's almost half the population, that there's just not enough resources. The divorce rates for blended families is almost 70%. It is actually really, really close to 70% when both partners come in with kids. So I'm like, this is not okay. We need some support.
I have so many questions. So I'm so glad that you have brought up this topic and that you have made it your own life mission, because I think you're right. I've not been through that experience myself, but I have friends who have, and like nobody ever talks about, oh yeah, I got help this way or that way, and they do talk all the time about how difficult it is. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I would really love for you, if you're okay with this, to talk about, what were some of the difficulties that you ran into, and are they typical of what most families go through?
Yeah. So, the difficulties, there's so many, because there's so many different aspects that can make blending a family hard. But I will say, like, I have never been shocked by things that my clients have come to me with, like, this thing is really hard for us. I'm like, yeah, I've totally seen that, like, over and over again. So if you're feeling something that's hard, it's probably typical. It's probably not unheard of or crazy. So some of the classic things that I see are, a huge one is co-parenting with like an ex-partner and the complications that can bring. Sometimes the other person is high conflict, or they feel like that they can tell you how to parent in your home, and just kind of some of those things that come up. That's a huge one. Another one that I see a lot is when you come in and you actually have different parenting styles. So I was parenting one way, you were parenting a different way, and we're trying to mesh it and bring it together, and that's hard. Especially if you have like pretty different viewpoints on what that is.
Right, because you're already set in your ways. You're not trying to figure it out, at the same time. So yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah. In a traditional family, you're figuring it out together and like seeing what works, what doesn't. Well, I've already got my way. We've already got our family rules, and you've already done it your way, and et cetera. And then you try to bring it together, and it's like, my way's right. You're definitely wrong in that aspect. Yeah, that's hard. People don't.
But not only that, your kids are used to your way. And so that's an extra dynamic on top of that. So how does that work? Like how do you manage those difficulties?
Yeah, that is rough. And the kids will react in different ways. That's one thing that's not super predictable. Sometimes the kids are really flexible and they're open to the changes. Sometimes the kids will dig their heels in and are like, do not tell me what to do. We're not making any changes. We've always done it this way. And all of a sudden, the new person in their life is this evil person because things are changing. And those are real feelings for the kids too. So we want to validate that experience for them, right? But how do we manage? And it's complex.
Yeah, that's a good word.
It's very complex. Yeah. Right. And our desire is to like go in and we want to make everyone happy. And that's not the reality of it. We're all going to have to give a little bit, and it's going to be new and different for every single person in the family.
So how did you manage that in your own family? Like, is it just like taking each child out one-on-one? Like that, like what did you do?
We did a lot of things wrong. I'll say that.
There's your trial of your school of hard knocks, right?
There it is. There it is. I will never claim that we did things perfectly. But you do your best. You do what you know at the time, and hindsight, like I know a lot more now than I did 10 years ago, are definitely things I would do different. But we just did the best we could, have a lot of conversations. That's really what I tell my clients to do, is get everyone involved in the conversations. Let's have family meetings. Let's let everyone have a voice, everyone be heard, validating those feelings. Like, this is hard. I know you have to move to a new bedroom because these people are coming into your house now, right? And things are changing and shifting. And I recognize that that's hard. What can we do to make this easier on everybody?
I love that. Just letting the kids have a voice. And honestly, I think that's something good in any family, but even more vitally important where, their lives are being disrupted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. What were some misconceptions that you had going into it? I mean, you mentioned earlier that, you thought it would be easy, right? So what specifically were things that were harder than you expected?
So for me personally, I was a school teacher when we got married, and so I thought in my head, I was like, oh, I deal with kids every day, like I can do that, like this is going to be a good transition for us personally. And I remember like hearing that step families were hard, but like my brain I couldn't even wrap my mind around like why it would be difficult, what was going to be hard. Like I understand that it is hard for a lot of people, but in our situation, it was like, well, we're good people. We've got great intentions. Our kids were pretty young still. So I thought, oh, we've got a lot of good things going for us. So that was a huge one. Like I couldn't even fathom what would be difficult. And then when the parenting aspect, I'm already a mom, and now all of a sudden I'm trying to be a step parent and figuring out how those roles look different. I couldn't just jump in and just start being a mom to this child that like barely knows me, right? So trying to figure out what that looked like. It was different than even a teacher role. That's kind of what I had anticipated it would look like. And it was different than that. So it was like a lot of experimenting with like, what do we want this to look like? What's working? What's not? Let's adjust. Let's readjust 2 years down the road because it's changed. A lot of flexibility.
So you've had to have just probably a lot of grace for yourself too.
Yes.
Right? So
and I wasn't good at that.
right. So how did you learn that then? Or are you still working on that? I mean, I think it's always a work in progress for everybody, but how has that how have you had to learn in that way to just accept where you're at in the moment?
That was probably one of the hardest and is one of the hardest lessons for me. Even now, like as I look back, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that different. I wish I could go back and change these things, and allowing myself to say, like, I did the best I could with the tools I had at the time, and to like move forward and say, now I know better and I can do this and choose different today. And that's hard. That's hard to be able to accept, like, yeah, I didn't do it maybe the ideal way. And that's life, and that's a hard lesson. It's hard for any of us. Like, I didn't do anything like crazy huge screw ups, but I do have things that I have regrets about, that especially now that I know better. Right.
Well, and again, that's life, right? That's every mom and every dad in the history of the world, right? Like,
yes. Yes.
There's always things that we're going to regret. And it's just on a different dynamic when you're dealing with a child who hasn't been yours and now is, and there's that learning time of learning how to love too, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
What was your experience with that?
The thing is that it's kind of our expectations. We expect that love will happen immediately. I'm actually an adoptive mom, and so I was like, oh, I
so there's that
adopted
dynamic too, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I had a child that I adopted, and that love did come pretty instantly. And so in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, that I know how to love other people. And the thing that we forget is that love comes through sacrifice. When we're sacrificing for other people, that's how we kind of gain some of that love. And so, especially like even with like birthing a child, like there's a sacrifice there, right?
Right.
You carried the child, you gave birth, there was that aspect to it. And so you have this love for the child. And when you're all of a sudden like being put together, it can be a little bit tricky, especially if the child is not sure about their relationship with you, or if there's some I'm thinking like through clients that I've had like behavior issues, or if they've got some special needs that might make it a little bit more difficult to just jump in and instantly feel that love. And actually, I just had someone on Instagram reach out to me and say, like, I am struggling to like my stepchild. And there's a lot of shame and big, heavy feelings that can come with a thought like that. Like, I must be a terrible person. And how do I manage? And the truth is, like, that's a real feeling. I don't walk around like love all the neighbor kids or all the kids that go to my kids' school. Like, sometimes their personalities like that are harder to love, like especially if they're doing certain behaviors. Now, I mean, it can be really complicated. So if we're shaming ourselves, like, oh, I should love this child and I don't in the way that I was hoping I would, it can send us into this shame spiral.
And it's tricky because if you're teaching or if you have a neighbor kid, like, they're not with you all the time, right?
Yes.
There isn't that barrier right?
Yes.
And so it's like it's a constant thing. So yeah, I can see how shame would be a huge part of a thought like that.
Yeah, yeah. And you hear things. I mean, I've heard other coaches or influencers say, I can't believe anyone would ever say that they don't love their stepchild. And the thing is that love takes time and relationships take work and time. And it doesn't always happen on our timetable as
And
much
it's
as we would like it to.
continuous. Like it doesn't
Hmm.
just because you've loved them one day doesn't mean tomorrow you're not, right?
Yes, yes. And there are different types of love too. Um, the way that I mean, I know people have the feelings when I when I say this, but the way I feel about my biological kids is a little bit different than how I feel about my stepchild, just because I'm with them all the time, right? And I have a different type of role in their life. It's going to look different. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like love is great. I love them all, but it is a little bit different.
Was that surprising for you? Like, because I
Yes.
would think going into that, oh, I will love, my spouse's children just like mine. So that is really surprising that you would say that. So how did you get over that? I'm sure it was difficult, right, to realize that. So how did that process go?
Um, that that was one of those things that like I had a lot of negative feelings about it myself. Like I need to love them all the exact same. I need to love them all as if they were all my biological children. And that's not the truth of it. It's a very different relationship. I'm not my stepchild's mother, and I'm not trying to be that. So that relationship is going to be different. I mean, it's a fun relationship now. And it took a lot of work and a lot of time to get there. And like, I absolutely would jump in front of a car for that child, right? Definitely love there. But um, this is an example. Maybe it's weird, but like my girls at home, I'm like kissing them all the time, right? And like loving on them. And it's not quite the same with my stepchild. I feel like that would be a little bit awkward or uncomfortable if I was doing that for me personally. So that's kind of an example of how it might look a little different. I am absolutely there to like support, go to band concerts or choir concert, whatever things, like I'm going to be there cheering them on, but um, not as involved. I don't have my fingers in all the things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And it probably depends on the child too, what that child is open to. If that child comes
Yes.
to you and says, I want this same thing, that's probably going to look a little bit different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So my
Yeah.
experience is definitely not across the board either. I have to say that I've worked with clients who have some that love is instantly there, and the child wants to have a really strong relationship with their step parent. And like that's amazing. A lot
Yeah.
of times that comes from if the other parent, the co-parent,
Hmm.
is open to for them having a relationship. That actually opens a lot of doors for that
So it's
relationship.
almost like the child needs permission from
Yes.
the other side. That's an interesting dynamic. And if that permission isn't given, then that puts a barrier there, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does. It has a name, and I didn't know it till a couple of years ago, but it's called the loyalty bind. When
That makes
the
sense.
child is hesitant to have a relationship with a new parent because they think, oh, if I like my stepmom, I'm being disloyal to my mom.
Right.
Yeah,
A
yeah. So
lot of,
that
and
permission
that's
is
a
important.
complex emotion for a child. That's
Oh, yeah.
huge. That's huge. And so to be respectful of that relationship and that boundary, I think is really big in a step parent.
Yes. Yep. And it's it's tough because you can't know, like you may have multiple stepkids and one might have be having a loyalty bind, the other one might be totally fine. And it's so even the relationship between those two stepchildren will look different because of their reaction
Right. And where
to the
they're at
situation.
internally. Right. Right.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you brought that up. These are dynamics I've never even thought about. So I'm so glad you're here. So you've talked about co-parents. Um, so those would be the ex-spouse, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about that dynamic. I know that it's different for every single family, because circumstances are different. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes it's an equal share, sometimes it's not. But how does that co-parent play into you as a step parent?
It's one of those things that again could make or break the the situation. A lot of my clients that come to me have tricky relationships there, and that's why they're coming to me, like, how do I handle this? Like, what can I do to feel like I'm not an outsider, to feel like I am even important in this family, right? Those types of feelings. The people that I see that can get along with each other, excuse me, at least for the sake of the kids, like, could be respectful, do so much better if they can have that. Now, I know that that's not always a realistic way to have co-parenting. I mean, I personally actually don't even have any contact with one of ours. The other one, we co-parent, like, we don't go hang out and go on vacations together, but we can, like, be in the same room and have a conversation, right? That type of relationship. And so I understand that there's tons of things that factors that can play into what that relationship looks like. Sometimes there's safety issues, right? Sometimes it's better if you just can't get along with the other person to just, like, stay in your own lane. They call it parallel parenting, where you do your thing and I do my thing, and we just keep our relationship as business-like as possible.
So parallel parenting, like, describe that a little, go into a little bit more detail with that. What does that, you stay in your own lane, but there's got to be some contact there because you share a child. So
right.
How do you stay in your lane?
So with parallel parenting, basically the idea is that we can't get along.
Right.
And because of that, we're going to have as little contact as possible. So we're not going to even try to get on the same page with parenting, because we know that that's going to end up making things worse in this situation. And so you're going to parent how you parent on your time. And then when it's my time, I'm going to parent how I parent. We might do pick up and drop off, like, at the school, so we don't even have to
Very
see
neutral.
each other.
Yeah.
Super, super neutral. And when it's those high conflict type of relationships, that ends up benefiting the child in the best way, because if we're trying to communicate, it's not going to go well.
Well, and a child can feel that energy too, right?
Yes.
So if the child knows it's safe and that you're not going to be arguing, then that makes them feel better as well. So I could see that happening. What if, because I hear this a lot when I talk with friends who have ex-spouses who parent so differently that it is difficult to get that child back into a functioning state when they come back to you. I hope I'm wording that correctly.
Yeah. Oh, I totally know what you mean.
So how can you go into, like, how, as a step parent, how do you help that child to feel normal?
Yeah. The thing about those types of situations is that kids are actually can be pretty flexible. They know that when I go to school, I follow these rules at school, and this is how we do it. This is our routine at school. And then when I go, like, to church, or if I go somewhere else, like, this is what it looks like here. And they're able to adapt to different places and circumstances. Would it be more ideal if we were on the same page with our co-parent? Yes. Yeah, right. Like, of course. Is that always going to work? No. So when it doesn't, we do the best with what we can. And maybe things are chaotic at this house, and then they come home and they're to this home, and we have structure here and we do it this way. And the kids will learn. It might take time, and those transitions will be hard. That's the biggest piece, is like transitioning from here to
Right.
here.
Mm-hmm.
But with time, they do figure it out. They do learn. And I think they start to, I mean, kids aren't dumb. They pick up on, oh, this is how it works here. And this is what I notice when I'm at this place. And this is what I see at this other home. And I mean, they learn lessons by observing, oh, wow,
That's true. Yeah.
the difference.
Well, they
And
probably learned this is what I can get away with at mom's house, and this is what I can get away with at dad's house, right?
yeah, yeah. And speaking of that, it brings up, like, sometimes kids will try to manipulate one house against the other, because they know that, oh, if I say this about dad, then this is mom's going to react this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so not to play into that, just stay really, really consistent for the sake of the kids. I mean, they're really like testing their security and stability when they're doing things like that. Like, what boundaries are you going to set for me here? That creates safety. So if we can stay stable for them, that helps them with the best environment as possible.
Well, and it probably helps you as parents too. This is the
Yeah.
way we're
Oh,
going
yeah.
to do things, and these are our rules, and this is, how it's going to be. And it sets that standard for you too, because
Yeah.
you better keep to that also, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going back to what we said at the beginning, like not being super rigid, because I think that ends up being,
That's true. Boundaries with flexibility, right?
yes, yes. And like having those conversations with the kids. So I'm not telling you everything to do. Like, let's come up with a plan together. Let's make this work for all of us. These are the house rules that we decided on as a family. We all invested in making these choices because we thought it would be the best for everyone. Instead of like, my dad got married to this new person, and now she has like 80 rules that I have to follow.
And you
Nobody's
can't even
gonna
keep
love
track of
that.
it all, right? Yeah.
Right. Nobody's gonna be a big fan of that. So trying to keep it simple, but in a way that where everyone can function well.
That's so important. So like you said, you made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. Um, what what resources did you wish that you had at the time?
I wish I had known some more people who were in blended families. I didn't even know anybody that was a stepmom at the time. And I actually felt really isolated. Like just out of place. Like I would even try to talk to like my family or friends, and they would just kind of glaze over, like, I don't understand why that's hard, or I can't even relate to what's even happening in your family, right? Where like kids are back and forth, and the frustration that came with that sometimes, especially in the beginning. They were like, oh, my kids are here all the time. I don't, right?
Right.
I don't understand what's happening. Like, isn't that nice to have them gone sometimes? Or, just confusion. So I guess to have like some support from people who understood. I was going to a therapist at the time, which was helpful, but I found that sometimes the advice I got didn't always work. It was like, in a nuclear family, this is how it works. But in a blended family and a step family, sometimes we have to think outside the box. It's not always black and white. It's very gray a lot of the time. And so to be, I wish I had known some of the tools and strategies. That's one of the things that would have been helpful, to just know other people in those situations. Like, well, how do you handle Christmas? What do you do? What do you do when one child is having 2 Christmases and the other child is only getting 1 Christmas? Like, what do you do in that situation? how do you handle that, right? Just to have ideas to bounce off, to get my mind to think outside the box a little bit more. But I guess those have been the biggest things. But to have someone that had been there and to say like, hey, I did lots of things wrong. That's why I'm doing what I do now.
Yeah. You needed
I,
community. You needed other people, that knew what you were going through for support. So I
yeah.
love that you created one and said, this is what I really needed. This is what I'm going to provide now. So I think
Yeah.
that's super fantastic. So what about working with your husband now? Like what have been some of your biggest takeaways on, I mean, you said you almost divorced over trying to blend your family. So how did you work that out? And what have been your biggest learning lessons?
Some of the biggest ones just in our relationship with each other is the communication piece, especially because we came in, both of us being divorced already, and we were both tired of like being pushed around. Like, I'm not going to be just doing everything you tell me to do, right? And so that was
Yeah, you've got like
a
your old past trauma bubbling to the surface, right?
oh, totally, like bad, both of us. And the thing is, like, people are like, well, you just heal yourself, like work on yourself before you get into another relationship. Well, that's really good advice, and we both did, but you can only heal so much on your own.
Right.
There's certain things that when you're back in the situation that are going to come up, and I couldn't have worked on that by myself. So I'm back in a marriage, and now it's time to practice the real thing, like apply the things, right? And so when we're having a conversation, instead of getting defensive, like it was practicing those communication skills. What can I do? I'm feeling defensive because this thing is triggering me, or it's reminding me of what happened before, and I don't want to relive that. And so how can I regulate myself in this moment? And and it was really like, we've got to do this together. What shifted a lot of it is it used to feel like we were against each other, butting heads,
Right.
like me against you, me and my child with you and your child, right? But it was when we finally like turned and said, we're on the same side. Here is the problem. Let's face it together. It's not you are the problem. It's the problem is over here. And we need to solve this.
And that makes a lot of sense because you've ended a marriage where you have been against each other. So you have to like not get out of being used to that. Right.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I bet, was there a pivotal moment at all when you're like, wait a minute, let's do this differently?
I don't know if there was one major moment. There were many steps along the way. A huge one, I do want to say a huge one was when we moved into a new house, and like started fresh into this new place that we were living. And that was a big, like, this isn't us trying to come into your space and change everything and do everything different. It's our new family unit is moving into this new home, and it's ours. Everybody in the whole family, we're on the same team. We're going to create it. We're going to decorate it how we want in this new unit, right? And I don't know if that makes complete sense, but it was almost like a symbolic.
That makes total sense to me. Total sense because if you're in a previous home, you've got the kids who were there, and the parent who was there, and now like you've got this invasion of
Yes.
space, right?
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
on the other side, we're going into something this like, how can this house be ours? Right.
Yeah.
And so if you get that new house, then it becomes an ours. So is that you said you've got a yours, mine, and ours, right? So
Mm-hmm.
did that add a different dynamic having an our baby too? So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. It did definitely change things. And I'll be really honest, like all of us were nervous about what that was going to look like. The kids were afraid that they were going to be forgotten. And I think those are normal feelings that come with a new baby, but especially when they've already been through
Totally
so
different
much.
dynamic. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And like, what is this going to look like? Um, but for our family, it ended up being one of the most beautiful. We actually ended up adding two more ours babies.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's the best thing. It's so great. Like everybody just it glued us together. Like we all have this one thing in common. That was one of the other steps. So we moved into a new house and then we had these two other babies and I love to see the relationship between the kids. And I'm not saying this isn't always typical. It's not I don't know what typical is. This is our experience in our family. But I just think it's the best thing. I think that kids learn so much from each other. Um they get pick up on each other's strengths and help each other through their weaknesses, if that makes sense at all. But it's
Absolutely.
been so fun to watch those relationships. I know my stepson was super nervous because we had a girl, the baby was a girl, and he was really wanting a brother. And so he wasn't very happy about that. Like, I just want someone to like play with. But honestly, like those two play video games all the time and you didn't even need a brother. Like, this is great.
Right. That's
It's
wonderful.
such a cute relationship.
That's so fantastic. I think it's amazing how I mean, it takes a certain amount of stick-to-itiveness, right? And patience. Is there, do you feel like there's any other character building traits that you've gained from this experience?
Oh, so many, so many things. But a huge one is the empathy for everyone. Like I now finally can see, like from the kids' perspective, what a loyalty bind might be like. I couldn't, I wasn't ever in that situation, but like with hindsight, I'm like, that must have been really, really hard. So empathy for that, empathy for people who've been there, empathy for people who've gone through divorces and had high conflict relationships and just new eyes. I see the world with a totally different perspective and like priorities, what really matters. That's been a huge lesson in a blended family. Like you really got to hone in on what your priorities are. What do I want to teach my kids? What is the most important thing? Is it that they play these sports? Is that going to be how I spend all my time? Or is it going to be that I want to teach them these truths, or that I want to really focus on, I don't know, kindness or whatever the thing is, right? I really had to force us to figure out what our priorities were.
Well, and you're doing that together, and as a family, right? And just making making that a priority, right?
Yeah, yeah. Another piece is like, because kids are not always at the house with us, like, how do we want to spend our time when we are together? What do we want to do with that time? And it's actually like almost more precious when we have that time together. We're more intentional with using that time.
Wow. That is really great. So when you are working with a client on this, I'm sure that empathy plays a huge role in that because you've been there, done that. What other kinds of things are you helping your clients with when you are coaching them?
A huge piece that I don't know if most clients know they need this piece. I know I would have been like, I'm fine. But it's our own mindset. So how we're experiencing it has a lot to do with our thoughts about the circumstances. And a lot of time what happens is we become like a victim in our circumstance, like this is what's happening and the ex-partner is doing this and I have no control and there's nothing right. And like that's where we naturally want to go as human beings. And I don't know, for some reason it like feels good to go there. Like I
You're
don't know
tapping
why.
into that hurt, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, this is just terrible and I have no control. And we kind of just like let go and become a victim in our circumstance. And so what I help clients do is kind of shift out of that mindset, like this is the circumstance, this is what's happening, but I can choose the story that I'm telling about it. I can choose if I'm gonna just let go of all controls. I have no control, there's nothing I can do, or I could say, you know what, I have power in this situation. I may not have power over this certain thing that's happening, but here's what I can do. Here's how I can get closer to my goals and to what I hope and desire for my family.
So it's really empowerment in the
Yeah.
moment with what you're dealing with. That's amazing. So you have some great resources on your website, and I'll post the link to your website so that people can find that. But can you tell us a little bit about those resources that you have to offer people?
Yeah. And I have to answer, it's not all the resources I have. Like sometimes I'll just create a new one. Like just this a couple weeks ago, I made a new one for um, holidays, like new traditions that you can have at the holidays, and that's not on my website. So if you want access to all the free resources, I recommend getting on my email list because I just send them out sometimes. But one that I have is probably my most popular resource is called 13 Significant Steps to Blending a Family. Kind of just takes you step by step. And again, it's totally free. So super simplified. Like the concepts are easy, make sense. To apply them all is not always so simple, but if you're just looking for like a step by step, what can we do? That's a really good one. Another one I have is how to get out of stepmom or mom burnout. I found that that is probably one of the biggest things that moms are coming to me for. Like they're just completely burned out. They can't do everything for everyone. So what can I do? So that resource gives some ideas. The other one is just ideas for how to help your family bond and connect with each other, because that's a whole ball game on its
Huge
own.
thing.
So that's what makes you feel blended. Like you could be living in the same house, but unless you're making memories and connecting with each other, you won't feel like a family.
That bond.
So,
So can you those are I encourage everybody to go on her website because it's super easy to find all of those resources. Is your and I think you've got a link there also for joining your email newsletter, right?
yeah, if you get any of the resources I just talked about, that'll automatically just put you on my list.
Perfect.
And so,
Perfect. Okay, so I have to ask you, given your experience and what you're doing now, what do you feel like your purpose is in life right now?
right now, my purpose is honestly like I can't even explain how deeply I felt pulled to do this work. Um, oh, I like resisted it for probably 2 years. I was like, no, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to do it. And I just can't deny the feeling that I'm having. Like, I need to help families, and families are the basic unit that is like holding our world, our country, everything together. And we need to be strengthened. We've got to like keep those marriages strong and help those kids feel loved, right? And help ourselves not lose our minds. So that's really I just feel really, really strongly that this work is some of the most important work that we could be doing for ourselves personally and for other people.
Well, and coming full circle, it's a complex issue. And and so it's it's not something that can be solved, you know, in a single day necessarily. And so it takes a little piece at a time every day. And I just think it's wonderful that you have put yourself out there in a position to, I mean, and it's really exposing, isn't it? When you're saying, "Hey, I've been through this, let me share my story so that I can help you too." And
Yeah.
so I commend you for putting yourself out there and doing this. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. It's very vulnerable.
It is. Do you have any other nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
Just the biggest message I love to share is don't give up hope, even though it might feel really hard, or you know, at the beginning when we were first married, I literally couldn't see how things would get better. I couldn't even imagine in my wildest dreams that our family would be getting along at some point. And that sounds like really dramatic, but I truly, that's where I was. Don't give up hope, because if I had given up on, I would have given the biggest blessing in my life. I would have just let go of it. And I have found that through the hard and tricky moments, it has actually brought us together even more. It's strengthened us even more. When my husband and I learned to communicate, that strengthened that relationship. When we were able to, it built trust. It built like just so many different things. So don't give up. Get some help if you need. Don't wait too long. I just had someone this week say, "I waited too long. We're getting divorced. I
Oh, that's super sad.
should have come to you 18 months ago." And I was like, no,
Yeah.
no. So don't wait too long. Just ask for help.
Yeah, so many good things come from asking for help. Wonderful advice from a wonderful lady. Thank you so much, Brittney, for being on today. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to share your story and to share with us your purpose as well. And as always, I tell everybody at the end of every podcast, you can find your purpose in your story, just like Brittney did. Until next time, take care.
Celebrate your dreams, let them take flight, for you are a star, shining bright in every step you take. Let your light glow, being you is the greatest way to